my dad always established a meeting place when we went on family vacations. Ideally, the meeting place was somewhere central and visible. The idea being if my sister or I got lost, we had a place where we could get found. My dad established a meeting place wherever we went. Yosemite National Park, the meeting place was the ranger station. Disneyland, the meeting place was the statue of Walt Disney. At the beginning of the trip, or of the day, my family would walk together to the meeting place. Then my dad would crouch down and look me and my sister in the eye and say, "Now, girls, if at any point you get separated from me or your mother, you come here and wait for us to find you." Thankfully, I never needed to use the meeting place. I was a bit too much of a rule follower as a kid, and so never tried to give them the runaround. I never got separated from my parents, except for occasionally losing track of them in the grocery store, which I must admit I did find rather terrifying, running around the perimeter and trying to see which aisle they were in. I never needed to use the meeting place because I never got lost. The same can't be said for Jesus. Today's story from the Gospel of Luke is a special one. It's the only story in the canonical Gospels that we have about Jesus as a child. There are some stories of Jesus at this stage in non-canonical texts, namely the infancy Gospel of Thomas, but you'll have to look those up on your own later. This is the only childhood story in the Bible. And perhaps fittingly for the child who will grow up to tell parables about a lost coin and lost sheep, it is a story about getting lost. Jesus and his family traveled to Jerusalem for the festival of Passover. This was one of 3 major pilgrimages that the Jewish people were instructed to make during the year. Not everyone in the Jewish diaspora could do so, given the length of the journey, but Jesus and his family in Galilee were about 3 days away. And Scripture implies that they regularly made the trip. Now, to paint a picture for us, this isn't Jesus, Mary, and Joseph together on their own little road trip. The pilgrimage involved a caravan. Entire villages would travel together. It's quite possible and even likely that the entire village of Galilee is on this journey together. In other words, it's big. And the population of Jerusalem itself would swell during these festivals, going from a regular population of around 90,000 to as high as 500,000. Can you imagine if the city of Chicago 5 times as many people for one occasion? In other words, it's big. So it's easy to see how Jesus slipped away from his parents. He was probably doing typical kid stuff, running around the caravan with his friends, his cousins, saying hello to extended family and neighbors, maybe seeing who had the best snacks, taking in the sights of the festival. I mean, after all, he's 12 years old. And it's a significant age, 12. It's named in the story for a reason. Jesus is right on the cusp of adulthood in his culture. He's going to turn 13 soon. Jesus and his parents, as any of you who have gone from raising a kid to having a teenager know, are entering a transitional season of life. Now, one way or another, Jesus gets separated from Mary and Joseph. And it takes them a while, given the number of people in the caravan, to realize that he's gone. Then 3 days pass before they locate Jesus in the temple, where he's engaged in what would typically expect from an adult. He's participating in conversation and study of the holy texts, things that he will do as part of his adult ministry many years from now. Mary and Joseph, with certain relief and perhaps justified frustration, say to Jesus, "Hello, we have been anxiously searching for you." At which point, Jesus looks up at them and says, "Why? Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know that I had to be in my Father's house?" Can you imagine? Can you imagine looking for your kid for 3 days? And they say, "Why?" It's an astonishing response. It's a response that tells us that, yes, in some ways, Jesus is a 12-year-old kid running around and getting separated from his parents. Yet in other ways, he is not. His response indicates that Jesus understands something of his own dual nature, his humanity and his divinity. Jesus understands something of both his human and his divine parentage. This must have startled and moved Mary and Joseph. We're told that Mary treasures this in her heart, in the same way that she treasured the interaction between the shepherds and her infant in the manger. Jesus' response also indicates that the temple was something of a meeting place, a place where it was expected for him to be, a place where he could always be found. But we shouldn't understand this solely as a physical place. The Greek for Father's house can also be translated as Father's interests. As a little project, you could check out maybe different versions of the Bible that you might have laying around your house. If you have different versions laying around your house, maybe that's a uniquely pastoral thing to have a bunch of different versions around. But you could look it up online and see which versions have which translation. Some say Father's house, but some say Father's interests. So yes, Jesus is saying, didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house, the temple? But he is equally saying, "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be about my Father's interests? Didn't you know I had to be about my Father's interests? My Father's business? Didn't you know I had to engage in this study and conversation and questioning? Didn't you know I had to talk about these scriptures that teach justice, hospitality, and love? Didn't you know, Mom and Dad, that I'm called to ministry? Didn't you know?" Jesus wasn't lost in this story. They just thought that he was. It's important here to highlight the parallel that's set up in this story between how long it takes Mary and Joseph to find Jesus, 3 days, and the length of time between crucifixion and resurrection, 3 days. In each instance, and at very different stages in his life, Jesus is believed to be gone, missing, lost to those who loved him, only to be found once again. Jesus wasn't lost. Jesus isn't lost. Jesus can always be found about his Father's interests. Jesus can always be found doing the work of justice. Jesus can always be found extending that radical hospitality. Jesus can always be found in the work of love and peace. Where then are we? My friends, Hyde Park Union Church, you are also on the cusp of something. You are entering a period of transition. Transition. That made it quite ominous, didn't it? This is Pastor Veronica and I's penultimate Sunday. And so all of us we're on the brink of something new. And like any transition, it involves some anxiety and fear, along with excitement, discovery. And so just like my dad would establish a meeting place at the beginning of a trip, I want to suggest a meeting place for the beginning of your journey. If you are uncertain in the days and weeks and months to come, if you ever feel separated from Jesus, if you feel lost, come to the meeting place. Come be about your heavenly parents' interests. Come be about God's work. Come learn together, question together, minister together. Jesus will always, always, always meet you there. And my prayer is that you will come to treasure this transition and all that you discover within it as difficult as it may be, as Mary treasured all these things in her heart. My prayer is that you will treasure one another. My prayer is that you will treasure what it means to be the congregation, Hyde Park Union Church. And as we sit on the cusp of this transition, we get to share together another important meeting place, a ritual that indeed reminds us where Jesus is and who Jesus is, as we come together for Holy Communion.